The moment I saw the HOA president, Brenda Tillman, marching toward my house with that familiar scowl plastered across her face, I knew my peaceful Saturday morning was about to go straight to hell. I was out front working on my truck, hands covered in grease, when she stopped at the end of my driveway and cleared her throat like she was announcing the arrival of royalty. My name is Robert Quinlan, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Columbus, Ohio, for about 3 years at that point. The HOA had been a minor annoyance up until then, mostly just sending passive-aggressive letters about my trash bins being visible from the street for more than 12 hours or my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall according to their ridiculous standards. "Mr. Quinlan, we need to discuss something important," Brenda said, clutching a folder to her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. I wiped my hands on a rag and stood up, already feeling my jaw tighten. "What is it this time, Brenda?" She walked up my driveway without invitation, her sensible beige flats clicking against the concrete. She was about 50 years old, with short blonde hair that looked like it had been carved from a single block of wood and never moved, no matter the weather. She wore a cream-colored cardigan over a floral blouse, and everything about her screamed that she had nothing better to do than make other people's lives miserable. "The board has reviewed your property records and discovered something quite interesting," she said, flipping open her folder with theatrical flair. "Your natural gas line runs directly past the clubhouse before reaching your home. Is that correct?" I felt a cold sensation in my gut. "Yeah, so what?" "So, Mr. Quinlan, we've calculated that it would be incredibly simple to tap into your line to provide heating for the clubhouse. It would save the HOA thousands of dollars annually." She smiled at me like she had just offered me a fantastic opportunity. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. "You want to steal my gas to heat the clubhouse?" "Steal is such an ugly word," Brenda said, her smile never wavering. "We prefer to think of it as community resource sharing. After all, you benefit from the clubhouse amenities, do you not?" "I've never set foot in that clubhouse," I said flatly. "And no, you absolutely cannot tap into my gas line. That's theft, Brenda, literal theft of utilities." Her smile finally dropped, replaced by that pinched, angry expression I had seen her use on so many other homeowners. "The HOA board has already voted on this matter. According to Section 12, Paragraph 8 of the covenant, conditions and restrictions you signed when you purchased your home, the HOA reserves the right to access utility easements for community benefit." "That section is about maintenance access, not stealing my gas," I said, feeling my temperature rising. "You seriously think I'm going to pay to heat a building I don't use?" Brenda's face flushed red. "This is not a request, Mr. Quinlan. The board has decided and the work will begin next week. You'll receive a formal notice in the mail." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway before I could respond. I stood there, grease rag still in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Brenda Tillman. That evening I called my neighbor Tom, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for over a decade. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear his television in the background. "Tom, did the HOA ever try anything weird with your utilities?" I asked. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Oh boy, what did they do now?" I explained Brenda's visit, and Tom let out a long whistle. "That's a new low, even for her. But it doesn't surprise me. Last year they tried to charge me a special assessment to repaint the clubhouse, even though the original paint job was less than 3 years old. Turns out Brenda just didn't like the color anymore." "What did you do?" I asked. "I paid it," Tom said quietly. "Fought it for a while, but my wife was tired of the constant harassment. They were fining us weekly for made-up violations. It was easier to just give in. I felt my resolve harden. I'm not paying it. Then lawyer up, Robert. These people don't play fair. The formal notice arrived on Monday, exactly as Brenda had promised. It was filled with legal-sounding language that basically said the HOA board had authorized a contractor to tap into my gas line, and that I would be responsible for maintaining the connection. There was no mention of them paying for the gas itself, of course. I immediately called a real estate attorney named Patricia Chen, who came highly recommended online. Her office was in downtown Columbus, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Patricia was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. She read through the HOA notice and the relevant sections of the CC and Articus while I sat in her office, watching traffic crawl past on High Street below. "This is absurd," she finally said, setting the papers down. "They're completely misinterpreting this covenant. The easement clause allows them to access your property for utility maintenance, not to literally tap into your service. What they're proposing is theft of services, plain and simple." "So what do?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "I can send them a cease and desist letter, but honestly, HOA boards like this rarely back down from just a letter. They'll probably ignore it and proceed anyway. If they do that, we can sue for an injunction and damages, but litigation takes time and money." "How much money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Retainer would be $5,000, and total costs could run anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 depending on how hard they fight. I felt sick. "To stop them from stealing my gas," Patricia nodded sympathetically. "Welcome to HOA law. It's designed to favor the association. They can rack up legal fees indefinitely using everyone's dues while you're paying out of pocket." I left her office with the cease and desist letter on the way to Brenda and the HOA board, but my mind was already working on alternative solutions. I wasn't going to let these people steamroll me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to spend $30,000 in legal fees. The next day, I took a personal day off work. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, and I've always been good with my hands. I walked the property line between my house and the clubhouse, following the path of the gas line. The line came from the street, ran across the corner of my property, then continued about 50 feet before reaching my house. The clubhouse was built maybe 20 feet from that line. I could see exactly what they were planning. It would be simple for a contractor to install a T connection and run a short line to the clubhouse. Once it was done, it would be expensive and complicated to remove, and I would be stuck paying for their gas forever. That afternoon, I called the gas company, Columbia Gas of Ohio. I explained the situation to the customer service representative, who sounded appropriately horrified. "Madam, if someone taps into my line without authorization, that's illegal, right?" I asked. "Absolutely, sir. That would be theft of service and tampering with gas infrastructure, which is extremely dangerous. If you believe someone is planning to do this, we can send a technician to inspect and document the line." "Can I request the line be moved or modified?" I asked. There was a pause. "It depends on the situation. What did you have in mind?" I explained that I wanted to reroute my gas line to take a different path to my house, one that didn't run anywhere near the clubhouse or HOA property. The representative said she would send a technician out the next day to assess the feasibility. The technician, whose name was Dale, showed up Wednesday morning. He was a stocky guy in his 50s with a weather-beaten face and a no-nonsense attitude. He walked the property with me, taking measurements and notes. "Yeah, we can reroute it," Dale finally said. "It'll cost you about $3,000, though. We'll have to run new line from the street along your back property line instead. More labor-intensive. How long will it take? I asked. If we start Friday, we can finish by Saturday evening. We'll have to shut off your gas for most of Saturday. Do it, I said without hesitation. Dale raised an eyebrow. You must really not like your HOA. You have no idea. I paid the deposit that afternoon, and Dale said his crew would be out Friday morning. I didn't mention any of this to Brenda or the HOA board. As far as I was concerned, what I did with my utility connections on my own property was my business. Thursday evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Quinlan. This is Dave Morrison from Morrison Plumbing and Gas. I've been contracted by Meadowbrook Estates HOA to install a gas connection to their clubhouse next week. I wanted to introduce myself and let you know we'll be working near your property line. I felt a surge of anger. Did they tell you where they're planning to get the gas from, Dave? There was a pause. I was told it would be a tap into an existing line. My existing line, I said. Without my permission. Did they mention that part? Another pause, longer this time. No, sir, they did not. Yeah, I figured. Dave, I'm telling you right now, I do not authorize any connection to my gas line. If you proceed with this work, I'll be reporting you to the state licensing board and the gas company for illegal tampering. I could hear Dave breathing on the other end. Sir, I appreciate you telling me this. I'll need to speak with the HOA and get clarification. If what you're saying is true, I can't do the work. It's true. I've already got a lawyer involved. After I hung up, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. At least Dave sounded like a decent guy who didn't want to break the law, but I knew Brenda wouldn't give up that easily. She would find another contractor, one less ethical, or she would try to force the issue some other way. Dale and his crew showed up bright and early Friday morning with a small excavator and a truck full of pipe. I took another day off work to supervise, which turned out to be a good decision because Brenda appeared around 10 in the morning. She stood at the edge of my driveway, watching the crew dig up my backyard, her face getting redder by the minute. Finally, she marched over to where I was standing. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Rerouting my gas line," I said calmly. "It's my line on my property. You're doing this to sabotage the HOA's project." Her voice was reaching that shrill pitch that made dogs bark 3 streets over. "I'm doing this because I don't want my utilities stolen," I corrected. "What you choose to do about heating your clubhouse is your problem, not mine. This is obstruction. This is deliberate interference with HOA business." She was practically vibrating with rage now. Dale walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "Madam, I'm going to need you to step back from the work area. This is a hazardous construction zone." Brenda turned her fury on him. "Do you know who I am? I'm the HOA president. I don't care if you're the governor, madam. Safety regulations apply to everyone. Please step back." Brenda stood there sputtering for a moment, then spun around and stalked off. I watched her pull out her phone as she walked away, and I knew she was calling someone, probably every board member she could reach. The work continued through Friday and into Saturday. The crew had to dig a long trench along my back property line, install new pipe, and connect it to both the street main and my house. By Saturday evening, as Dale had promised, everything was done. The old line that ran near the clubhouse was cut, capped, and abandoned in place. "You're all set," Dale said, handing me the final paperwork. "Gas is back on, everything's tested and safe. The old line is completely disconnected and depressurized." I shook his hand and paid the remainder of the bill. $3,000 was a lot of money, but it was a hell of a lot less than $30,000 in legal fees, and I had the satisfaction of knowing the HOA couldn't touch my gas supply anymore. Sunday afternoon, I was in my garage organizing tools when Tom called me, sounding worried. "Robert, I just got a call from another board member, Darlene. She said the HOA is planning to fine you $50,000 for violating the CC and Artiques. On what grounds?" I asked, feeling my stomach sink. "They're claiming you made unauthorized modifications to utility infrastructure on HOA easement property without board approval." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The work was entirely on my property, on my utility line. They have no grounds." "I know that and you know that, but Brenda doesn't care. She's furious, Robert. I've never seen her this mad." "Let her be mad. She can't fine me for work done on my own property to my own utilities." But Tom's warning stuck with me. I knew HOA boards could levy fines first and ask questions later, and fighting fines meant more legal bills. I decided to be proactive. Monday morning, I called Patricia Chen again and explained what had happened over the weekend. She listened carefully, asked a few questions about where exactly the work had been done, and then told me she would draft a letter to the HOA explaining why any fine would be groundless and would result in a countersuit. "The thing is, Robert, they know they don't have a case," Patricia said. "But they also know that most homeowners will pay a fine rather than fight it, even an unjust one. They're betting you'll cave." "I'm not caving," I said firmly. "Good. Then let's make sure they understand that." The letter went out Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I had a certified letter from the HOA informing me of a special hearing scheduled for Thursday evening to discuss my violations. The letter was signed by Brenda and two other board members I had never met, Susan Hartley and Richard Norton. Thursday evening, I walked into the clubhouse for the first time since I had bought my house. It was a bland, beige building with all the charm of a dentist's waiting room. The main room had a few folding tables, some uncomfortable-looking chairs, and a small kitchenette in the corner. There was a heating unit on the wall, currently dark and silent. About 20 people were scattered around the room, mostly older residents who apparently had nothing better to do than watch the HOA try to crucify someone. Brenda sat at the head table with Susan, a thin woman with gray hair and glasses, and Richard, a balding man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt and khakis. "Mr. Quinlan, thank you for joining us," Brenda said with false politeness. "Please sit." I remained standing. "I'd rather stand, thanks." Brenda's jaw tightened, but she continued. "We're here to discuss serious violations of the Meadowbrook Estates CC and Artiques. Specifically, you made unauthorized modifications to utility infrastructure without board approval." "The modifications were to my private utility line on my private property," I said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. "The HOA has no authority over my private utilities." Susan spoke up, her voice ready and uncertain. "But the CC and Artiques require approval for any external modifications." "External modifications to structures," I corrected. "Underground utility relocation isn't mentioned anywhere in the CC and Artiques. Trust me, I've read them cover to cover." Richard cleared his throat. "The spirit of the rule is that homeowners should consult the board before making significant changes. The spirit of the rule doesn't override property rights and common sense," I shot back. "You don't get to approve or deny what I do with my utility connections." Brenda's face was flushing red again. "The board has decided to levy a fine of $50,000 for this violation, payable within 30 days. I pulled out my phone and made a show of opening the voice recorder app. "I want to make sure I get this on record. You're fining me $50,000 for relocating my own gas line on my own property to prevent the HOA from illegally tapping into it. Is that correct?" The room went very quiet. A few of the residents shifted uncomfortably. "This hearing is not being recorded," Brenda snapped. "You're right. Your hearing isn't being recorded," I agreed. "But my statement of your actions is being recorded, and I can record whatever I want. Now, would you like to repeat your fine decision for the record?" Richard and Susan exchanged glances. Richard leaned over and whispered something to Brenda, who looked like she wanted to explode. "The fine stands," she finally said through gritted teeth. "Great. You'll be hearing from my attorney." Again. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. Oh, and just so everyone here knows, the HOA was planning to tap into my gas line to heat this building without my permission and without paying for the gas. When I prevented that by relocating my line at my own expense, they decided to punish me for it. "Just thought you all should know what your dues are funding." I walked out before anyone could respond, but I heard the murmur of conversation start up behind me. "Good. Let them talk." Patricia wasn't surprised when I told her about the fine. "They're overplaying their hand," she said. "This is actually good for us. We can use this as evidence of harassment and retaliation when we countersue." "Countersue?" I asked. "Oh yes. We're going to sue them for attempted theft of services, harassment, and abuse of their fiduciary duties. Plus, we'll get the fine thrown out and possibly recoup your legal fees." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Months, probably. Maybe a year. But Robert, these people need to be stopped. If they're doing this to you, they're doing it to others." She was right, and I knew it. But the thought of a year-long legal battle made me tired. The next few weeks were relatively quiet, at least on the HOA front. I was working long hours on a project at my engineering firm, and the distraction was welcome. Then, in early November, things escalated again. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find a padlock on my mailbox. Not just any padlock, but a heavy-duty one with an HOA tag hanging from it. There was a notice zip tied to the mailbox post stating that my mail privileges were suspended until all outstanding fines were paid. I stood there staring at it, feeling my blood pressure spike. Tampering with mailboxes is a federal offense, but apparently Brenda either didn't know or didn't care. I took several photos with my phone, then called the non-emergency police number. The officer who responded, a young guy named Officer Matthews, listened to my explanation and examined the lock. "Yeah, they can't do this," he said, shaking his head. "Mailboxes are under federal jurisdiction. I'll file a report and you should contact the postal inspector." "Can you make them remove the lock?" I asked. "I can ask, but if they refuse, you'll need to go through the Postal Service. Technically, since it's a federal issue, it's out of our jurisdiction for enforcement." After Officer Matthews left, I called the Columbus post office and explained the situation. The woman I spoke with was appropriately outraged and said she would send a postal inspector out the next day. But I wasn't waiting until the next day. I went into my garage, grabbed my angle grinder, and cut the lock off. The whole thing took about 30 seconds. I left the pieces on the ground beneath the mailbox as evidence and went inside. The postal inspector, a serious woman in her 40s named Inspector Rodriguez, showed up Wednesday morning. I showed her the photos of the lock, the physical remains of the cut lock, and the HOA notice. "This is mail tampering," she said flatly. "Federal offense, punishable by fine and imprisonment." "Do you know who specifically installed this lock?" "I don't have proof, but it was almost certainly done at the direction of the HOA president, Brenda Tillman." Inspector Rodriguez took detailed notes and collected the lock pieces as evidence. "I'll be speaking with Miss Tillman and the HOA board. If they did this to you, they may have done it to others. Thank you for reporting this, Mr. Quinlan." 2 days later, Tom called me laughing. "Robert, you have to hear this. Brenda got visited by a federal postal inspector yesterday. Apparently, she nearly had a heart attack when the inspector threatened her with federal charges. Good, I said. Maybe it'll make her think twice. Oh, it gets better. The inspector apparently interviewed several other homeowners who have been on Brenda's bad side, and at least 2 others confirmed their mailboxes had been tampered with in the past. I felt a grim satisfaction. Finally, Brenda was facing consequences. That satisfaction lasted until the following Monday when I discovered someone had dumped a truckload of mulch in my driveway. Not quality mulch either, but the cheap, foul-smelling stuff that's barely composted. The pile was enormous, at least 10 cubic yards, completely blocking my driveway. There was no note, no indication of who had done it, but I didn't need a note to know. I called the police again, and this time a different officer responded, Officer Kim. She was in her 30s, looked tired, and sighed when I explained about the ongoing HOA dispute. Let me guess, Meadowbrook Estates, she said. You've dealt with them before, I asked. Oh yeah, we get calls from that neighborhood regularly. The HOA there is notorious. She took photos of the mulch pile and filed a report for vandalism and property destruction. Can you do anything about it? I asked. Without proof of who did it, not really. But I'll go talk to the HOA board members, let them know this is being investigated. I spent the rest of the day shoveling mulch. It was back-breaking work, and the smell was horrific. Tom came over to help, which I appreciated, but it still took us until after dark to clear the driveway enough for me to park my truck. This is getting out of hand, Tom said, leaning on his shovel. Brenda's going to keep escalating. I know, I said, but I'm not backing down. The next escalation came in the form of weekly violation notices. Every single week, I would get a certified letter listing numerous violations. Everything from my grass being too long to my house numbers being the wrong shade of brass to my driveway having stains. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I documented everything, took photos disproving each claim, and forwarded it all to Patricia. She was building quite a case file. This is textbook harassment, she said during one of our calls. We have more than enough for a restraining order and an injunction. I think it's time to file suit. In late November, Patricia filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, Brenda Tillman personally, and the other board members. We sued for harassment, abuse of authority, attempted theft of services, and sought an injunction preventing them from levying any further fines or taking any action against me pending resolution of the case. The HOA was served the week before Thanksgiving. According to Tom, Brenda absolutely lost her mind when she got the papers. She was screaming in the Clubhouse parking lot, Tom told me, going on about how you were attacking the HOA and threatening the whole community. It was quite a scene. Things were quiet over Thanksgiving, which I spent with my sister's family in Cincinnati. It was nice to get away from Meadowbrook Estates for a few days and remember what normal people acted like. But when I returned home Sunday evening, I found my front door hanging open. My stomach dropped. I called 911 immediately and waited in my truck until the police arrived. This time, 2 officers responded, including Officer Kim from before. They cleared my house while I waited outside, then gave me the all-clear to enter. The damage was extensive. Furniture was overturned, drawers were dumped out, and my television was smashed. But weirdly, nothing seemed to be stolen. My laptop was still on my desk, my wallet was still on my dresser, and the cash I kept in my nightstand was untouched. This looks like vandalism, not burglary, Officer Kim said. Someone was making a point. I knew exactly who was making a point. It's the HOA, I said. It has to be. Officer Kim looked uncomfortable. Mr. Quinlan, I believe you that you're having problems with your HOA, but I can't arrest people without evidence. Is there anything missing that would make this a burglary? Any proof of who did this? I checked my security cameras, but I didn't have any that covered the front of my house, only the driveway and backyard. Whoever did this knew that. The police filed a report for breaking and entering and vandalism, but I knew nothing would come of it without proof. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up and documenting the damage for my insurance and my lawyer. Patricia was furious when I told her, "This has crossed a line. We need to file for an emergency restraining order." We went to court 2 days later for an emergency hearing. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Brennan, listened to Patricia present our case, including all the escalating incidents. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy named Martin Pierce, argued that there was no proof the HOA was behind any of the vandalism, and that the civil lawsuit was a separate matter. Judge Brennan looked unimpressed. "Mr. Pierce, there's a clear pattern of escalation here following your client's dispute with Mr. Quinlan. While there may not be direct proof, the circumstantial evidence is concerning." She granted a temporary restraining order preventing Brenda Tillman and the other board members from contacting me directly or taking any action regarding my property pending a full hearing. I felt a wave of relief as we left the courthouse, but Patricia warned me not to get too comfortable. "Restraining orders are only effective if people follow them," she said, "and people like Brenda Tillman don't like being told what they can't do." She was right. The very next day, I received an email from the HOA's management company, not Brenda directly, informing me of an emergency special assessment of $10,000 per household to cover unexpected legal expenses. The email made it clear that my lawsuit was the cause of these expenses. It was a clever move. By having the management company send it instead of the board, they were technically not violating the restraining order. And by spreading the cost across all homeowners, they were trying to turn the neighborhood against me. Tom called me within an hour of the email going out. "Robert, people are furious, but not at you, at the HOA. Everyone knows this assessment is because Brenda got sued, and a lot of people think she deserves it after everything she's pulled over the years." That was somewhat reassuring, but I still felt guilty that my neighbors were being dragged into this mess. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Other homeowners started reaching out to me, sharing their own stories of HOA abuse. There was Margaret, an elderly woman who had been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. There was James, a veteran who had been in a months-long battle over flying an American flag. There was Linda, a single mom who had been harassed over her son's basketball hoop. The stories went on, and a picture emerged of an HOA board that had been abusing their authority for years, with Brenda Tillman as the ringleader. "We should do something," Margaret said during an impromptu meeting at Tom's house in mid-December. About 15 homeowners had gathered, all of us fed up with the board's behavior. "Like what?" James asked. "They control everything." "We vote them out," I said. According to the bylaws, a special election can be called with a petition signed by 20% of homeowners. We had 15 people in the room, and Meadowbrook Estates had about 250 homes. We needed 50 signatures. Over the next week, we canvassed the neighborhood. It was eye-opening how many people were eager to sign. By the end of the week, we had 73 signatures. We submitted the petition to the HOA's management company, as required by the bylaws. The management company was required to schedule a special election within 30 days. Brenda's response was predictable. She sent out an email blast claiming that a small group of troublemakers was trying to destabilize the HOA, and that changing leadership would result in chaos and financial ruin for everyone. But her fear-mongering didn't work this time. Too many people had been burned by her over the years. The election was scheduled for January 15th. In the meantime, the holidays came and went. I spent Christmas with my family again, grateful for the distraction. The full hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for early January. Patricia had subpoenaed records from the HOA, including financial records, meeting minutes, and all correspondence related to me. What we found was damning. The meeting minutes showed that the board had discussed tapping into my gas line and had explicitly decided not to seek my permission because they anticipated resistance. The financial records showed numerous questionable expenses, including thousands of dollars paid to Brenda's husband's landscaping company for work that was never done. "This isn't just harassment," Patricia said, poring over the documents in her office. "This is embezzlement and fraud." We brought all of this to Judge Brennan at the hearing. Martin Pierce tried to deflect and minimize, but the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Brennan made the temporary restraining order permanent and expanded it to include the entire HOA board. She also ordered an independent audit of the HOA's finances and referred the matter to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for potential criminal charges. Brenda's face when the judge announced the criminal referral was something I would never forget. She went from red to white in about 2 seconds. The special election happened on schedule on January 15th. The community center where we normally met was packed with homeowners. The turnout was unprecedented. Brenda, Susan, and Richard were all up for recall, along with the 2 other board members who had been less visible but equally complicit. We had put together a slate of 5 new candidates, including Tom and Margaret. The vote wasn't even close. All 5 existing board members were recalled by margins of over 70%. Tom, Margaret, and 3 other reasonable people were elected to replace them. Brenda showed up to the meeting but didn't stay for the results. She stormed out halfway through the vote count, and I never saw her at another HOA function again. The new board's first action was to vote to drop all fines against me and to settle my lawsuit. The settlement included the HOA paying all my legal fees, reimbursing me for the gas line relocation, and paying me an additional $20,000 in damages. More importantly, the new board implemented actual oversight and accountability measures, including term limits and required financial audits. The independent audit ordered by the judge revealed that Brenda and her husband had embezzled over $150,000 from the HOA over a period of 5 years through fraudulent invoices and kickback schemes. In March, Brenda Tillman and her husband were arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Richard Norton was also charged as an accessory for knowingly approving fraudulent payments. The criminal trial happened that summer. I attended several days of testimony, watching as prosecutors laid out the scheme in detail. Brenda had been treating the HOA like her personal piggy bank, and Richard had gone along with it in exchange for Brenda supporting his pet projects. In August, Brenda was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to make full restitution. Her husband got 3 years. Richard got 2 years of probation and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board. As fall approached, life in Meadowbrook Estates finally felt peaceful. The new board was reasonable and responsive. Tom was doing a great job as president, focusing on actual community improvement rather than petty tyranny. I was in my garage one Saturday in September, working on my truck again, when Tom walked over with a beer in each hand. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, offering me a bottle. I took it gratefully and leaned against my workbench. "Thanks. The new board voted last night to officially apologize to you," Tom said, "for everything you went through. It's going in the minutes and in a letter to all homeowners." I nodded, not sure what to say. An apology was nice, but it didn't give me back the months of stress and harassment. Tom seemed to read my mind. "I know it doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know that what you did, standing up to Brenda, it changed this whole community. People aren't afraid anymore. We're actually functioning like a real HOA should, helping people instead of hurting them." "That's good," I said. "That's really good." We stood there drinking our beers in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the houses. The clubhouse was visible from my driveway, and I could see through the windows that people were actually using it for a community event, something that had been rare under Brenda's reign. "By the way," Tom said, "the board voted to have the HOA pay for a proper heating system in the clubhouse. Quoted out at about $8,000 for a new high-efficiency unit. Funny how that's way cheaper than all the legal fees Brenda racked up trying to steal your gas." I laughed. "Yeah, funny how that works." My phone rang. It was Patricia Chen. I excused myself and answered. "Robert, good news," she said. "The settlement check cleared and I'm closing out your file. Also, I thought you'd want to know that 3 other homeowners from your neighborhood have retained me to pursue claims against the old board members for various abuses. Your case opened the floodgates." "That's good," I said. "People deserve justice." "They do. And Robert, thank you for not backing down. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on." After I hung up, I rejoined Tom. We finished our beers and talked about normal things, work and sports and the upcoming holidays. It felt good to have a normal conversation with a neighbor without HOA drama lurking in the background. As winter approached again, I found myself actually enjoying living in Meadowbrook Estates. The new board had loosened a lot of the ridiculous restrictions Brenda had imposed. People could leave their trash bins out for a reasonable amount of time. Gardens could have whatever color flowers people wanted. Kids could play basketball in their driveways without fear of fines. It was amazing how much better the community felt when the HOA actually served the community instead of the other way around. I never did use the clubhouse, even though I technically could have. But I was glad it was there, properly heated with its own system, hosting community events and bringing people together. One evening in November, almost exactly a year after I had cut that padlock off my mailbox, I was checking my mail when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Are you Robert Quinlan?" she asked. "I am," I said cautiously. "I live over in the Riverside HOA, about 10 miles from here. We're having problems with our board and someone suggested I talk to you. They said you successfully fought back against an abusive HOA." I invited her to sit on my porch and she told me her story. It was depressingly familiar: arbitrary fines and harassment, abuse of power, and homeowners too scared to fight back. "What did you do?" she asked. "How did you win?" I thought about it for a moment. I documented everything, got a good lawyer, and refused to back down. But the real change came when other homeowners realized they weren't alone and organized together. One person fighting an HOA is hard. A community of people demanding accountability is unstoppable. She nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Did you ever regret fighting instead of just paying?" "Not once," I said without hesitation. "Some things are worth fighting for: property rights, fair treatment, accountability. If we don't stand up to people who abuse power, they'll just keep doing it." We talked for about an hour, and I gave her Patricia Chen's contact information. As she drove away, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Maybe my experience could help others. Over the following months, I heard from several more people in similar situations. Word had gotten around about what happened at Meadowbrook Estates, and people were inspired to fight back against their own abusive HOAs. I started keeping a document with advice and resources for fighting HOA overreach. Patricia helped me refine it, adding legal perspectives and practical strategies. We even set up a simple website where people could access the information for free. It wasn't something I had planned, but it felt right. Brenda Tillman had tried to steamroll me, and in fighting back, I had stumbled into something bigger, a community of people refusing to be bullied. By the spring, Meadowbrook Estates had become something of a model for HOA reform. Other communities reached out to Tom and the board to ask how they had implemented their new governance structure. The local news even did a story about the transformation. I was interviewed for that story, and the reporter asked me what I would say to other homeowners facing similar situations. "Don't assume you're powerless," I said. "HOAs have authority, but that authority has limits. Know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to push back when they overstep. And remember, you're not alone. There are almost always other people in your community who feel the same way." The story aired on a Friday evening, and by Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with messages from people across Ohio and beyond, all sharing their HOA horror stories and asking for advice. It was overwhelming, but also validating. What I had gone through mattered. It had made a difference, not just for me but for others. As summer arrived, I found myself in a strange place. The lawsuit was settled, the criminals were in prison, and the HOA was functioning properly. Life was normal again, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. But I was different. I was more aware of how systems of power could be abused and more committed to standing up against that abuse. I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing, and that backing down in the face of injustice only enables more injustice. One Saturday in July, the new HOA board threw a community barbecue at the clubhouse. The building was properly heated now when needed, and properly cooled in the summer. The board had used some of the recovered embezzled funds to make improvements, new furniture, fresh paint, and actual amenities that people wanted. I decided to attend, my first time actually going into the clubhouse for a social event. Tom greeted me at the door with a huge grin. "Look who finally decided to use the facilities he helped save," Tom said. "Figured I should at least see what I was fighting for," I replied. The event was well attended, with probably 50 or 60 homeowners milling around, eating burgers and hot dogs and actually enjoying themselves. It was a stark contrast to the tense, fearful atmosphere that had pervaded the community under Brenda's rule. Margaret came over with a plate of cookies. "Robert, I made these especially for you. A thank you for everything you did." "You didn't have to do that," I said, "but I took one anyway." "It was delicious." "Yes, I did," she said firmly. "You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. That takes courage." As the afternoon wore on, more people came up to thank me or share how much better the community felt now. It was humbling and a little embarrassing, but also gratifying. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, I found myself standing outside the clubhouse with Tom, looking at the building that had been the center of so much conflict. "You ever think about how different things would be if you had just let them tap into your gas line?" Tom asked. I considered it. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes. My life would definitely have been easier in the short term." "But," Tom prompted, "but Brenda would still be embezzling money. People would still be getting harassed over nonsense. And I'd be paying to heat this building for the rest of my life," I said. "So no, I don't regret it," Tom nodded. "You did the right thing. Not the easy thing, but the right thing." We stood there for a moment longer, then headed to our respective homes. As I walked up my driveway, past the spot where my old gas line used to run, I felt a deep sense of peace. My house was mine. My utilities were mine. And my community was finally free from a tyrant who had ruled through fear and intimidation. It had been a long, difficult fight, but it had been worth it. Every penny spent on legal fees, every hour spent documenting violations, every moment of stress and anger had led to this, a better community and a clear conscience. As I settled into my recliner that evening, I thought about how a simple refusal to let someone steal my gas had turned into something much bigger. It had become about principle, about standing up for what was right, and about refusing to let bullies win. And in the end, the bullies hadn't won. They had lost everything: their power, their freedom, and their ill-gotten gains. Justice had been served slowly and imperfectly, but served nonetheless. I pulled up the website I had created to help other homeowners and saw new messages waiting. People from Texas, Florida, California, all over the country, reaching out for advice and support. I started reading through them and responding, sharing what I had learned and encouraging people to stand up for their rights. It wasn't the way I had expected my life to go, but it felt meaningful. As the weeks and months continued to pass, life in Meadowbrook Estates continued to improve. The new board was transparent and responsive. Community events were regular and well attended. People actually liked their HOA, a concept that seemed impossible a year ago. I continued to help other homeowners navigate their disputes, offering advice and connecting them with resources. Patricia Chen ended up specializing in HOA law, building a thriving practice representing homeowners against abusive boards. One day in early autumn, I got an email from a law professor at Ohio State University. He was writing a paper about HOA governance and reform and wanted to interview me about my experience. I agreed, and we spent an hour on the phone discussing everything that had happened. "Your case is becoming something of a landmark," the professor said. "Not in a legal precedent sense, but in terms of demonstrating how homeowners can effectively organize against abusive HOAs. I was just trying to keep them from stealing my gas," I said with a laugh. "Maybe," he said. "But what you ended up doing was shining a light on a systemic problem. HOAs in this country have enormous power over people's homes and lives, and there's very little oversight. Cases like yours are starting to change that conversation." After we hung up, I sat thinking about what he had said. I hadn't set out to change any conversations or be any kind of example. I had just refused to be a victim. But maybe that was enough. Maybe individual acts of resistance, multiplied across thousands of communities, could actually create change. As winter approached again, 2 full years after this whole mess had started, I found myself in a good place. My lawsuit was settled, my house was my own, and my community was thriving. The gas line that had started everything was working perfectly, running along my back property line far from the clubhouse, heating only my house as it should. Brenda Tillman was in prison. Richard Norton was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again, and the embezzled money had been recovered. Justice, imperfect but real, had been achieved. I still got occasional updates about the criminal cases. Brenda's husband was up for parole soon, though Brenda herself had another year to serve. I felt no particular satisfaction in their imprisonment, just a quiet relief that they couldn't hurt anyone else. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA, under Tom's leadership and the reformed board, had become a model for other communities. They regularly got inquiries from other HOAs asking about their governance structure and oversight mechanisms. Tom told me that several nearby communities had implemented similar reforms after seeing how well ours was working. It was a ripple effect, spreading outward from one man's refusal to let his gas be stolen. On the second anniversary of the day Brenda had first approached me about tapping into my gas line, Tom organized a small gathering at his house. It was just a handful of us, the core group who had pushed for reform and fought to take back our community. Margaret was there, along with James, Linda, and a few others. We sat around Tom's fire pit, drinking beer and cider and talking about how much had changed. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," Linda said. "When we started collecting signatures for that recall petition, I thought for sure Brenda would find some way to stop us." "She tried," James reminded her. "Remember that email she sent claiming the petition was invalid?" We all laughed. That email had been pure Brenda, full of bluster and threats and completely wrong interpretations of the bylaws. "The thing that amazes me," Margaret said, "is how quickly things got better once we had reasonable people in charge. It wasn't some complicated fix. We just needed board members who actually cared about the community instead of their own power." "That's usually how it works," I said. "Most problems aren't as complicated as people make them." Brenda's whole scheme would have cost the HOA nothing if she had just asked to pay for a tap into my line legally, or better yet, installed their own proper heating system from the start. But that wouldn't have been free, Tom pointed out, and that's what it was really about for her. Getting something for nothing and feeling powerful doing it. As the fire burned down and people started heading home, Tom pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said, "for starting this. I had been living with Brenda's tyranny for 10 years and I just accepted it. You showed us we didn't have to." "I was just protecting my property," I said. "No," Tom said firmly. "You were standing up for what was right. There's a difference, and it mattered." I drove home that night feeling content. The road ahead was clear, both literally and figuratively. No more HOA drama. No more legal battles, just normal life in a community that functioned the way it should. My gas line was my own, running safely along my property line, heating my house and nothing else. It was such a simple thing, but it represented something important, the right to control your own property and not be bullied by people who thought rules gave them unlimited power. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the clubhouse in the distance, lights on for some evening event. People were coming and going, using the facility that had been at the center of so much conflict. It was working exactly as it should, heated by its own system, managed by responsible people, serving the community. I had won, not just the legal battle, but the larger fight for principle and justice. And in winning, I had helped others win too. It was a good feeling, one I knew I would carry with me for years to come. The reminder that standing up to bullies, even when it was hard and expensive and stressful, was always worth it in the end. The lights in my house were warm and welcoming as I walked up to the front door. My house, my property, my rights, all intact and protected. Behind me, the community I had helped save was thriving. It had been a long, difficult journey from that first confrontation with Brenda Tillman to this moment of peace. But every step had been necessary. Every fight had been worth it. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I knew now about the cost and the stress and the battles ahead, I would make the same choice. Because some things are worth fighting for, and freedom from tyranny is one of them.